Good afternoon. On this Saturday, we are in the last chapter of this book, the last story or last chapter. And we have been chronicling the progress of our male character from childhood to adolescence to early adulthood to marriage with child, and now he's totally grown up, a mature adult, married with children, and he's on his way to a party at his aunt's house. It's a great affair every year. His aunts are Kate and Julia Morton, and they hold it every year. It's always the great food, plenty of alcohol, and they've held this party even though their brother Pat has died. There's our first dead person in the story. This is a musical family. Julia used to sing in the church choir. We'll have to talk about that. And Mary Jane is studying music at the academy. So they're very musical. But it's 10 o'clock and there's no sign of Gabriel or his wife. And Kate and Julia are wandering around, getting in each other's way, wondering where he is because they can't do anything without him. And so they're paralyzed. Gabriel arrives, and the aunts have a maid. Her name is Lily. And Lily is supposed to take his coat. And just like the boy in Araby who saw the girl only physically, Gabriel sees Lily is slim, a growing girl, pale in complexion, with hay-colored hair. So he sees her physically, just like the boy in Araby did. He wants to make small talk with her, and so he says to her, "Well, I suppose we'll be going to your wedding one of these fine days with your young man." And suddenly Lily becomes angry and bitter and says, "The man that is now is only all palaver and what they can get out of you." Apparently, the man that she was with used her. Don't forget our character in Two Gallants who uses women. And she's bitter about it. The problem is that Gabriel feels embarrassed and uncomfortable about having said this to her because of her answer. And we have to stop and talk about this because Gabriel shouldn't really feel this way. He didn't know what happened in her relationship with her young man. Nobody told him. He's just trying to be nice and make small talk. But he sees himself as making a social error a serious one. He takes it personally. Gabriel is stout, tall, healthy looking, but he's restless. We don't know why he's restless. So to make up for his so-called social error with Lily, he tries to give her a coin. And this almost compounds it, trying to buy your way out of a mistake. She says, "No, I can't take that." He comes away from this encounter in a bad mood. He's here tonight to make a speech. He has to make a speech every year at this dinner. And he's wondering about the quote. And he doesn't want to appear as if he has a superior education, but he wants to do a decent job. And he feels he might fail. And he's taken the wrong tone. And he's very uncertain about his speech before he's going to give it. Just then his aunts and his wife came out of the ladies' dressing room, and there are his aunts. He sees them. Julie is the older. That means she'll be the first to die, most likely. The second dead relative that he has is his mother. And we'll have to talk about that in a little while. Greta is his wife, and she begins to talk, and she is talking about how he makes her wear something called galoshes, and it's as if she's saying he's a domineering husband. She's just joking, but he takes it personally and thinks she's portraying him as a bad, domineering husband. Galoshes. Aunt Julia is so old, though, or so unaware, her mind is going, that she doesn't get the joke and doesn't know what galoshes are. She's never heard of them. She's more or less dated herself. But Greta points out that Gabriel wants her to wear these because everybody on the continent wears them, and there's that theme again that everything wonderful is in the East. You got to go east from Dublin if you're going to get anything good. They're glad that they have Lily, but she's not the girl she was at all. Well, that's because she got her heart broken. And they notice this. And more than once now in the story, we're going to hear that Julia is wandering around the room, wandering here around the house, and her mind is wandering. She's not what she used to be. So we got two women, Lily and Julia, who aren't what they used to be. They want him to take care of a guy who's going to show up at the party of Freddie Malins. Freddie Malins is an alcoholic. His mother had him take the pledge not to drink. Apparently that didn't do much good because he's still drinking. We've already had an alcoholic in the story back there in Ivy Day in the committee room. And we've got one now. But he does promise that he will take care of Freddie. He's should be returning the hospitality his aunts are extending to him. And Mr. Brown is there. And he's telling jokes. Some of the jokes are off-color jokes. Jokes you don't tell with women, but he does tell an off-color story with women, and he offends them. And yet, even though he's a phony, he's a harmless kind of guy. But he does offend the ladies. His manners are not good. And Julia is still wandering. Joyce spends some time describing Freddie, and he sounds like Gabriel's second self. Gabriel's size and build, has round shoulders, a fleshy, pallid face, coarse features, a blunt nose. He almost sounds like our character back in Two Gallants. And he's rubbing his hand in his left eye, as if he's crying or there's something in his eye. We're not really sure. Somebody says, isn't he a terrible fellow? Well, yes, he is, and no, he isn't. He's an alcoholic. I don't know if he's terrible about it. But instead of keeping his word and managing Freddie, it's Mr. Brown, who told the off-color story with the ladies, who's old, who's harmless, who decides to take care of Freddie and lead him around and point him in the right direction. Gabriel does not keep his word. Mary Jane sits down at the piano, their niece, to play the piece she's learned at the academy, to show off what she's done. Everybody sits and listens politely, or maybe they're entertained, but there are four young men who stand in the doorway for a little while and then slip away in pairs to go get some drinks. They'll come back at the end of the piece and stick their head back in the door to applaud, but they didn't hear any of it. They are hypocrites. Gabriel is maybe listening, maybe not, but he's looking at the pictures on the wall of the room, and he sees the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. And you Shakespearean scholars know that Romeo and Juliet both die in the tomb at the end of the play, so we get another death image. Gabriel starts to think about his mother, who's dead. And Kate called her the brains of the family. And he does remember that she did a lot for him and his brother. She helped Constantine to be a senior priest in his congregation. She helped Gabriel get a good university education. But some things she said about his wife and his marriage bother him still. And she may not have really liked Greta, his wife, even though Greta nursed her in the final months of her illness. The young guys come back from the bar, applaud the hypocrites. Time to dance. Gabriel is not paired up with his wife, he's paired up with a Miss Ivers. And so they begin to dance. And she brings up the fact that Gabriel reviews books for the Daily Express, and that's a newspaper that maybe is too influenced by England. And she needles him a little bit like this. She says, I'm ashamed of you. I didn't think you were a West Briton. So she's needling him for appearing to act as if he's English or British when he's not. Yet Gabriel thinks that he really enjoys reviewing these books because they're new and he gets them for free. But he's perplexed. He doesn't have a comeback for her. Again, he's paralyzed by her accusation. And yet, of course, she says, I'm only joking. And she is. She's just joking. She's not serious about this. She's not going to take it to the wrong level. She asks him if he will go to the Aran Isles in the west. Remember that every day in the west, the sun sets. And the west is where the dying part of the day is. In a story called The Dead, I think that's significant. And he points out that, no, I go to the east. I go to Europe on a cycling tour with some guys every year. We go to France, we go to Belgium, keep up on the languages. And she's sort of pushing him on this, but he finally snaps, he shouldn't, and he says, I'm sick of my own country, just sick of it. Why is he getting so angry? And she says, why? And he's tongue-tied. He doesn't know what to say, so she says again, why? And he has no answer, and she says, of course, you have no answer. And he doesn't have an answer. Why is he sick of his own country? Again, he's agitated. He goes through the dance. The Lancers are over. He goes away to a remote part of the room, and there's Freddie Malins' mother there. She's very old. She has white hair. She can't walk or walk very well. She's going to need a lot of help. And she talks, and she's rambling. And Gabriel's not listening. His mind is on first Lily, now Miss Ivers. So he's had two women who've agitated him in one night. And so his wife comes up to him and says, did you have some words with Miss Ivers? And he lies and says, no, there were no words. He's moody. He said, she just wanted to go to the Aran Isles for a trip. And his wife gets really excited. Oh, yes, let's go. I'd love to see Galway again. And he coldly says, you can go if you like. He's angry. He doesn't want to go there. And his wife turns to Mrs. Malins and says, well, there's a good husband for you. She's being a little sarcastic. She should be. Why doesn't he want to go to the West? Supper's coming near, and he's going to have to make this speech. He wishes he was outside. He feels trapped, enclosed in this house, in this room, these rooms. He wishes he could be outside. So his fingers tap on the cold window because he wants to get away, he wants to escape. He's listening to his own tormented thoughts, and he's talking about the younger generation which has lost its sight of hospitality, humor, humanity. He's really talking about his own generation, and he may be the person who's lost sight of hospitality, humor, and humanity. And then there is this real attitude about his aunts. They're just two ignorant old women. Well, he's not really returning their hospitality. They're his mother's sisters. He should have some feeling for them. Julia sings. Her voice is strong and clear. Maybe her mind is not what it used to be. She wanders around the house. Maybe she's getting a little old in the mind. Maybe she's a little senile. But she sings in a strong, clear voice. And when she is done, everybody applauds, and Gabriel somewhat applauds, but it's Freddie Malins, whose emotional, strong reaction is to come across the room and take her hand in both of his hands and shakes it. He has no words. Okay, maybe he's a drunk. Maybe he's a bad person because he's a drunk, but at least he has a genuine emotional reaction to an artistic event. Unlike the four young men who didn't really listen to Mary Jane's Academy piece and disappeared to the bar. Freddie Malins heard the whole thing, and he really is moved by it, and he shows it. They're now sitting at dinner, or about to sit at dinner, and they start to talk about how Kate is angry that Julia has been thrown out of the choir. And she's been in the choir, and a lot of women have been thrown out of the choir because the Pope said he didn't want women in choirs. And Kate is not happy about this, especially for people like Julia who've been laboring in choirs forever. But we got a woman, Kate, who's bitter about the decision of a man. Lily was too. Kate is now bitter at the Pope for throwing her older sister out of the choir. Now Miss Ivers is getting ready to leave. She's not going to stay for the supper. And Gabriel offers her a way to leave. I'll see you home. And if you think about it, he's really hoping that she will leave, and he wants to make sure that she leaves, so he'll take her home to make sure she leaves because she's embarrassed him and he's taking it personally. So it doesn't encourage her to stay. He says, I'll take you home so you leave. And she does leave, but she doesn't want her to take him home. Here comes Kate toddling out of the supper room, wringing her hands in despair. These two older women are paralyzed about what to do. It's a good table, and his mood begins to ease. He's a good carver. He knows how to carve a goose or a turkey or a roast. and he's at the head of the table, so he feels pretty good about this position. But Aunt Kate and Aunt Julia are toddling around the table, tripping over each other's heels, getting in each other's way, giving each other orders, and they are confused, and right now they're somewhat useless, and they're paralyzed. They don't know how to manage their own party. So he stops talking, and they sit down to eat. He doesn't talk at all. And they begin to talk about fine voices and fine singers. And there are 2 points that come out of this. The first is that in Dublin, you don't really hear the great tenors anymore. You don't hear the real stars of the opera circuit, like Caruso. Somebody points out, well, no, none of them come to Dublin. And so art is paralyzed in Dublin. Dublin is a backwater. The great singers don't come here. They begin to talk about singers they've heard. And of course, they say the great singers are, you guessed it, in the East. They're in London or Paris or Milan. Mr. Bartle d'Arcy says this warmly. I suppose Caruso is quite as good, if not better, than any of the men you have mentioned. Maybe so. But Mary Jane would like to hear Caruso sing. He's the star of the opera at that time. You don't know who he is. We're going to need that in a minute, because they begin to talk about other singers. And Aunt Kate remembers a singer called Parkinson. And everybody at the table goes, who? And without knowing it, Kate has just dated herself. That means that she's just said something that shows that she's from a really old generation. It's as if I mentioned some athlete from 40 years ago. And you'd say, well, who's he? If you know about him, you must be really old. And okay, so Kate has done the same thing. Nobody knows who Parkinson is. He's from a very long time ago, and she must have heard him. And she must think he's in the same league as Caruso. You don't know who Caruso is. Then it's time for dessert. They get into a spiritual discussion. They talk about monks who sleep in their coffins. Okay, more death references, more death imagery. I like that idea very much. Wouldn't be comfortable, but they are very good men. The monks are very pious men. And that's good. They have dessert, and he begins his speech. And as he's beginning his speech, he's thinking about the snow outside, and the air is pure, and the trees are weighted with snow, and the Wellington Monument has a cap of snow. He's talking about taking the will for the deed. Ladies and gentlemen, he talks about his feelings. What have been his feelings tonight? Well, his feelings have been agitation, offended, a little angry, embarrassed, not really having a good time at this party. And he talks about the tradition of hospitality, and some people see it as failing. Well, he's failed it. His aunts asked him a favor, manage Freddie Malins. He didn't do it. He didn't keep his word. And we're going to see other people not really return the hospitality they've been given tonight. And even when he's rolling through his speech, he's thinking about, I'm glad Miss Ivers isn't sitting at the table, because she'd be laughing in the back of her hand and saying, well, he's a West Brit. So he's very self-conscious about that. He's really describing his generation that has lost humanity and hospitality and humor. He hasn't shown much humor tonight. He hasn't returned the hospitality of his aunts. And maybe he's not very human. His humanity is shot. He does say that thinking about the dead could paralyze the living. Well, maybe he's right, but maybe it's good to remember the dead. I will not attempt to choose between them. His speech ends, the group rises, they've all got glasses in their hands, and they do a toast. This is the brief moment when the entire group is united as one, and they're all on the same page. And there's a break. The party has gone late into the night, and now it's early morning. And the reality hits because it's piercing morning air. It's cold out. Kate says that Mr. Brown is everywhere. He's kind of ridiculous. She's not really being hospitable to him by ridiculing him. And suddenly some people hear music. They overhear this music. But while they're overhearing the music, they tell the story of Johnny, the mill horse. Johnny was a mill horse. He traveled in a circle, pulling some kind of a mill that ground up anything, corn or grain. So he was always going in a circle. And one day, their grandfather, Patrick Morkan, decided he wanted to take Johnny the cab horse, hitch him up to a small cart, and drive down to the place where the aristocrats and the upper class people were to see them. And so he hitched the horse up, and they got downtown, and the minute that Johnny the mill horse, saw the statue of, I believe it was King William, he starts traveling in a circle. And Patrick Morkan can't get him to break out of the circle. And it's a funny story, somewhat, but notice the paralysis here. The man goes to rise in society and associate with a higher social class. He's paralyzed. He's lower class. He can't do it. And so he's got a paralysis. Mrs. Malins is somewhat paralyzed. She has to be helped down the front steps by her son and Mr. Brown. There's a lot of confused talking. Everybody's getting ready to leave. And now Gabriel sees something. He's in a dark part of the hall looking up the staircase. There's a woman standing at the top of the first flight. It's his wife, leaning on the banister, and she's listening to something. He's surprised at how still she is, but here in this situation, whether you know, Gabriel is in the dark, which is to say, he does not know what's going on with his wife. He only thinks he does. And so he's in the dark. And he can't hear the same music. They're not on the same page. He asked himself, what is a woman standing on the stairs in the shadow listening to the distant music a symbol of? She's not a symbol of anything. Well, she is a symbol of something he's about to find out. He catches the emotion of the song. The song seemed to be in an old Irish tonality. The voice is by a plaintive distance. It's Mr. Bartle D'Arcy that's singing. And then it ends. And Mary Jane has heard it, and she would like him to sing another one. But D'Arcy stops the song. He breaks off, and they're in raptures listening, Mary Jane says. And Bartle D'Arcy snaps and says, I can't sing now, I'm hoarse. So he does not return the hospitality of his hosts. He won't even finish the song that he started. They're getting ready to leave, and he sees his wife walk down the stairs. Now remember, she's standing on the stairs above him, and like the boy in Araby, he only sees her lower half. He only sees the physical side of her behind. He's not going to see what's going on with her for a while. And when she turns to him, her cheeks are wet. She's been weeping. And he suddenly, his heart rises. His heart rises, he thinks, well, something romantic's going to happen between us. D'Arcy says it's called the Lass of Aughrim, and she says, the Lass of Aughrim, yes. The morning is dark. There's a dull yellow light over the houses. It's not a beautiful morning. The buildings are menacing or threatening. This is not a romantic atmosphere. His wife is walking ahead of him, but Gabriel's very happy. Blood is bounding through his veins. He thinks that they're, yes, going to make love. He thinks they're going to have a romantic evening that they have not had in a long time. He wants to run after her. He wants to catch her by the shoulders, say something foolish, something affectionate. Defend her against anything. He's really getting into this fantasy. It's taking him away. And he feels joy. And he's going to forget the years of their dull existence and the routines they have to go through, taking care of their kids and going to work. For the years he felt had not quenched his soul or hers. He's beginning to fall into a fantasy. He's going to call her softly, and she's going to respond to him and run into his arms and all that. Okay. So they're walking toward the hotel or the boarding house where they're staying. She leans for a moment on his arm. She leans lightly on his arm, as lightly as when she had danced with him a few hours before. He felt proud. He feels happy. He's happy about her grace and her beauty. Again, he's attracted to the physical. Somebody helps them up the stairs and carries their bags. She mounted the stairs behind the porter, her skirt girt tightly about her. He could have flung his arms about her hips and held her still, for his arms were trembling with desire. Again, he sees her only physically, and he only sees her lower half. He's about to be enlightened. Remember, he's in the dark, not knowing about what is going on with his wife at all. A ghostly light from the street lamp. There's going to be a ghost in the room pretty soon. He's trying to make the fantasy real. He's trying to make it happen. So he says, Greta. But he does not get the reaction he wants. Her face looks serious and tired. And he says, you look tired. I am a little. And they begin to talk. And it begins to dawn on him that his romantic fantasy is not going to happen. But for a minute, when she says, you are a very generous person, he thinks it will happen. So he's going back and forth. Then, dipping one arm softly about her body, drawing her towards him, he said softly, Greta, dear, what are you thinking about? So he holds her in his arms and thinks, okay, it's starting. Isn't this wonderful? And he says, what are you thinking about? She's about to tell him. She doesn't answer. She doesn't really yield to him, doesn't want to embrace him. Tell me what it is, Greta. What's the matter? And she doesn't answer, and then she says, I'm thinking about the song, The Lass of Aughrim. Why? I'm thinking about someone from long ago. And who is it? And he's getting angry now. The smile is gone from him. I'm thinking about a boy I knew when I was young. His name is Michael Fury. Symbolism. What is fury? Fury is passionate intensity. And this is what Michael Fury represents. And this is what Greta had with him, a passionate intensity. And so he asks her, you were in love with him? And she simply says, in a roundabout way, well, we were great at one time, which is, yes, we were in love. And so this means to him, like you'll see with Gatsby next year, that he wasn't first in his wife's heart. He was maybe 1A or 1B, but he wasn't 1. And he realizes now that his wife is separate from him in this love. He starts to feel sorry for himself and at the same time ashamed that he wanted to start this fantasy with her. I was great with him at that time, she says. Really what she's saying was I was in love back then with him. Well, what happened to him? Well, he died for me. Okay. How did that happen? Well, the rest of the story. She was in Galway and she was in love with Michael Fury, but she was going to leave Galway. And on the night before she left, it was raining, and Fury came and stood under a tree in the rain to say goodbye to her, more or less. And then he must have caught a cold or a pneumonia, and he died. Is it romantic that a man dies for a woman? Well, maybe. In Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, Sidney Carton gives up his life for the woman he loves. And Michael Fury does the same thing here for Greta. This is the ghost in the room, the ghost of another man. And he visited her in the rain. And right now he's buried in the west of Ireland. And rain is falling or snow is falling on his grave. And Greta sobs, choking sobs. And so all of Gabriel's resolve about being romantic with his wife disappears completely. His passion is totally paralyzed. She falls asleep. And he feels kind of a pity for his wife and for himself. They're both aging, and he knows this. And he knows that Aunt Julia will die before Aunt Kate. She's been thrown out of the choir now. His words are paralyzed. He has no speech for death. Who does? Fury's death, however, is going to contrast to his. He figures he'll die quietly somewhere, whereas Fury's death was full of passionate intensity and romance. And he feels his death will not even begin to match up with that. He begins to cry. He's never felt like that toward any woman, a passionate intensity. And he sees Fury standing under a tree in the rain. and he's losing his identity, Gabriel is. Again, we are reminded, Fury is buried in the west of Ireland. The west is where the sun sets every day. The west is the dying part of the day, the place of death. That's where Fury is and should be. And snow is falling on his grave right now. And Gabriel realizes at the end of this chapter that we are all in the process, he thinks, of dying. And that ends Dubliners, and that's the last chapter.